So I would like to begin by asking you to tell me the story from your perspective of Murshid Sam's peace plan for the Middle East, and in one sort of stream of consciousness, your participation, I believe, in the first round of the Middle East pilgrimages some time ago.
Well, I'll do the best I can. I mean, in terms of Murshid's peace plan, basically it was eat, dance, and pray with people. But beneath that, there was a deep, serious scientific study of soils and ecology and the whole region of the Middle East that he was interested in as a scientist. And it was part of his vision that was reflected in his cosmic poetry. The book that was published is the Jerusalem Trilogy, which really, if you can read it clearly, it's filled with this kind of vision of peace in the world, beginning at this heart center in the Middle East. And as a spiritual heart center, it also reflects a great deal of psychic attachment and political obfuscation, or whatever you want to call it. I mean, it becomes the most difficult place to work. And I think he was just satisfied to see that the context of his vision worked, namely the dances, that they brought people together. And there, he went to some of the first meetings where we brought Palestinians and various Israelis and Muslims and people from that were in the Bay Area, and we found a meeting ground there, eating together. He knew people in that region loved to eat. He loved to eat. He loved to feed people, and he'd eaten all over the world. And he knew, just the bonds of breaking bread and sharing in that way with people around the world are, basic and reflect on that inner kind of secret that was his. Jalaluddin Rumi said, everyone was drawn to me to become my friend, but no one knew what it was that drew them. Murshid Sam had that inner magnetism, that drawing thing, which was connected with his own inner connection with God. I would say one interesting thing about the early work, which he put a bunch of us into positions of trying to make things happen in this way, and I think it was quite analogous in some sense to what Hazrat Inayat Khan experienced in his attempt to spread Sufism. I mean, Murshid Samuel Lewis was a good example of someone who remained faithful to a practice over a long period of time. But a lot of people to whom a lot of great leadership roles were offered sort of just didn't pan out because they didn't choose to make that kind of dedication over the long run to this particular concentration. I don't know. I mean, I feel like I have to go back and start at the beginning. That was not what I wanted to say. I guess your first question caught me as a curve. I really wasn't expecting that kind of total direct on thing about his peace plan in the Middle East, because I'm more comfortable talking about how the dances arose and how they became focused in that way, I guess. Because there were a lot of problems with Hallelujah, the Three Rings, ego problems. Reflecting on it later, I think the best thing we ever did was dissolve the organization. I remember the Whirling Dervish Bazaar at the first one that was organized at the Sausalito Art Center that all of Murshid's disciples did, which was a wonderful community event. Hallelujah, the Three Rings had an auction there, and the person running the auction had so much of her ego into it. Murshid came in and demanded all the money himself from this from their rummage sale or whatever they had there. You know, I mean, it was like, she didn't want to turn it over to him, you know, because he didn't want it to all be tainted by the, you know, the ego ambitions. And people went over. There were things. There were camps, but there were pageants. I mean, there was all this stuff, but there was also a certain there was a lot of just the thing that makes for the most failure, which is, I think, people attached to ego leadership ideas about themselves, rather than just getting deep into the message. Murshid made me his representative to Hallelujah, the Three Rings, but I was never able to have the kind of weight with my peers there that was necessary. I mean, it just didn't happen in a full way, but it set seeds, and Murshid knew that. He was great at understanding how the seed promised the plant, because he was constantly working in this meditation in which he was seeing his own plan for the world and his vision miniaturized in his own life and then magnetized across the whole scope of the world through this Sufi practice called the greater witnessing, where your heart becomes the altar of God and what you bring to it becomes visioned in the world. And this was really his constant practice, though he didn't speak about it. He wrote about it in papers for disciples. And I remember him talking about his visit to Kew Gardens in England, where he'd gone there, and the gardener was apologizing because the plants were not in bloom. And he says, "I'm a gardener. Don't you know I can see what it's going to look like?" And so his life was that way. He saw all the seeds that he'd planted coming up at the end. And I think one of the most beautiful things he ever said about it was, he said, "I feel like a gardener that has planted seeds in his garden and nothing came up." And then the next year he planted more seeds and nothing came up. And the same thing happened the next year and the next year and the next year. And then finally one year he planted a bunch of seeds as usual, and they came up, and all the seeds from the year before came up, and all the other seeds came up, and all this, and the gardener, and Sam, is running around like crazy trying to harvest all these seeds, all these concentrations that he's worked on his whole life. And he said, and then the voice of God came to me and says, "Harvest what you can and leave the rest to me." And so he relaxed at that stage, because he could see what was coming. He could see, even in the mixed roots of Hallelujah, the Three Rings, this tremendous intention and visioning of the three religions together. He said he was the incarnation of Nathan the Wise, which is a funny thing to say, because Nathan the Wise is a literary figure in a play, I think, by Schelling, if I'm not mistaken. But he's someone who was able to show the basic unity between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam from his own experience with the great Emperor Saladin, who Murshid wrote in the voice of in his poem Saladin. So, I mean, because in himself there was the unity. And that's the mystical principle on which all this success is really based. It has to be based on some kind of realization. For him, he had the realization at the core of religion, which was the ineffable nature of God. And he could see it and be recognized in all these different paths. Because he was such an uninhibited individual, he was able to jump over cultural boundaries that people of his generation generally were not able to do. And from the very beginning, he was interested in the Middle East and in the Far East. So I don't know, as for myself, I've just been kind of riding a wave of a certain kind of miracle, I guess. I mean, that you see happening when I remember the first dances of Universal Peace in our garage at the Minter Garden, where I live with Murshid. And there was still an oil stain on the floor because David Hoffmaster kept his pickup truck in there when instead of to work on sometimes. So, but we decided we'd have dances down there because it provided more room. And even then, he knew that they were going to go all around the world. I mean, he just never had any doubts from the beginning. A few people dancing around in the basement, because he felt the inspiration from God. He said, God is making me an instrument of the new age through these dances, bringing about this work for world peace, as long as we're repeating the name of God. We're going to be working with this power behind it. And he said from the beginning to his Sufi teacher in Pakistan, I'm going to get 100,000 people to say Allah. And at the time, people thought that was outrageous and impossible. Now, of course, who knows how many people have said that, and many other sacred phrases that came from that. But excuse me if I can have a drink. So, can you help me along here?
Oh, yes, of course. Another thing that came to me today that I would love you to speak to is I'm going to be purchasing the rights to use that little piece of footage of Hazrat Inayat Khan. And I would love to be able to link Murshid's life to Hazrat Inayat Khan and to the dances in general. So my next questions will be about well, let's stay with Hazrat Inayat Khan for a few moments.
Yeah, I'd just like to repeat the story that Murshid used to love to tell about his first interview with Hazrat Inayat Khan. He said he was still a very timid young man, a very serious student and a very loyal student, but nothing like this Fudo master, Allahu Akbar, powerful person, fearless. He was a young man, and this was the time when he said that he really received from Hazrat Inayat Khan the full power of his magnetism. And the circumstance was they were in a hotel in Beverly Hills, and Inayat Khan said to Murshid, he said, Samuel, how many loyal disciples do you think I have? And he said, I mean, he knew he had thousands around the world, but he said he could tell from the tone of the question that he meant something else. So he said, 100. He said, I wish I had 100. I wish I had 10. I wish I had 5. I wish I had as many as I have fingers on this hand. And he stood up and he said, and Samuel said, my chair fell over backwards, literally in a comic opera kind of scenario. But at that time, he caught this full power of this man who had this tremendous strength, but kept it continually restrained under this, personality of, great harmony. And Sam carried this power with him. I mean, his whole life. I mean, and if there was one quality that you could say about him was this sense of God is powerful. God is all the power there is. There's nothing to be afraid of. Move forward fearlessly in this universe of God, like the fish that you're swimming in the ocean. And that was something he caught at that time from Inayat Khan, because he said later, Hazrat Inayat Khan would have given his right arm to have the kinds of disciples that I had. People, and now people are seeing another level of, I think, evolution of soul coming in. I see it around camps with teenagers these days. Great, bright souls with purity of intention, and coming in clearly knowing what the light is and just going for it without anybody ever being able to pull the veil over their eyes. I mean, this is a phenomenon that Sam saw in Inayat Khan was in on the very beginning. So when you're a pioneer, you don't have the easiest material to work with. Samuel Lewis turned out to be very good material. Lucky for the Sufi message, because a lot of things started and just didn't get past a certain point. But Hazrat Inayat Khan's being was so great that Murshid said when he met him for the first time, it was like it happened to be on the spring equinox. and he was heading, and so he was right in the light. So it was, for him, he said it was like he couldn't, it was just a total experience of light. The vision that he brought of what was called the message, I think, is what always moved inside of Murshid Samuel Lewis as well. I mean, he went to the East. He received robes from Sufis in Pakistan and India and in Egypt. I mean, he was accepted all over in Islamic as well as in Hindu. He would go into Hindu temples and jump up on the altar and give the flute of Krishna. I mean, he was unabashed. He was, he was intoxicated in God in that context, and he didn't apologize for anything, because what came out the other end was beauty and blessing. And so why be self-conscious when you're not really acting from the same kind of self-consciousness that a lot of people are? But a lot of people saw that as a kind of ego braggadocio quality. He says, if you can do it and say you can't, isn't that being hypocritical? So there was that. What I'm trying to say is, even though he was able to find this commonality and be accepted in all these different cultures, he always kept this ideal of universality as the primary place. And he always thought that efforts at the spiritual level ought to be balanced by efforts at the physical level, so that even though what you did might seem on the grand scheme of things small, like sending some blankets to people suffering from a tornado or such, nevertheless, putting that actual physical action together with the thought and the meditation made for a more complete kind of answer. And so he always did that himself. I mean, at that personal level where he miniaturized, was acting cosmically, bringing seeds from one culture to another, things like that. So the seeds, they continue to come, and I think that we will be entering into, whether you want to call it an Aquarian age or whatever, where humanity is going to come into more of a sense of mutual acceptance and harmony. But as Hazrat Inayat Khan said, the problem is that evolution in the world is not taking place at an even pace, so that you have some cultures that are, and some places where we're still working out the most primal kinds of evolutionary factors, as well as some instances where communities and beings have gone way beyond. It's that imbalance that makes people continually upset about the situation. You got to hold it with a much bigger view than just the very tiny view of the difficulties that we face. Our difficulties are not insolvable. And Murshid was very optimistic, and Hazrat Inayat Khan was very optimistic about it, looking through, having to see through the world wars in advance, but knowing still that there was a better age coming for humanity.
Would you please talk a little about the dances of universal peace as you see them now through the work that Sadi has been so instrumental in helping others, really, to going to Poland, the Soviet Union. I'm wondering if you could sort of address, are we fulfilling Murshid's wishes with the dances, how we're doing them, and also the broader picture of the outreach?
Oh, I'm sitting here by his gravesite, and it's a Sufi tradition that you can feel the enduring presence of the saint and the communication. I mean, Murshid could hardly be happier. I mean, this is the fulfillment of one of his great dreams, and something that he saw and was able to do on this miniature scale. But for him, being able to have one event where you get together with Israelis and Muslims and Arabs and Christian Arabs and all the rest of it, and have it be a good eating, praying, harmonious event with the dances. I mean, for him, that was seeing it happen already on the world scale. Now it is happening. it is really happening. And, all you can say is praise God, alhamdulillah. I mean, he could hardly be, he's delighted by that. I mean, this is a fulfillment of a dream. Now, the thing about Murshid Sam was he was not one of these people that wanted to dictate how everything, the form of how everything had to be. He wanted the mantra quality left into the dance as far as possible, because he knew that that way the years-long tradition of calling on the sacred phrase for realization that his own consciousness was also bringing into the dance as like the guru who offers the phrase to humanity, because that blessing is always been a part of its success. He wanted that to be a part of it, and it is, and it's at the core of it. And at the same time, he saw all this other cultural diversity and bringing in the goddess and the old religion and Egyptian. And he did, I remember, Ra, Keper, Ra, Atum, Egyptian dance that he did. I remember him playing the part of Bacchus in a dance that I'm sure is long forgotten. But it was, and he'd like to talk about it, comparing the role of Bacchus and the role of Krishna. And he had, because he said Bacchus still has some ego in this relationship. Nevertheless, he was able to portray it as a sacred relationship and as part of the Mediterranean mysteries. So I feel that there's no problem whatsoever that anyone could ever see in terms of this general vision, because he also saw the angelic dances, as he called them, and you see them all now too. I mean, with a lot of the more plain song kind of chanting and so on, and this is lovely. I mean, he liked the idea of ritual and movement. He had us represent the cards in the tarot pack that he cast us as, had us do the walks of, and enact a pageant in which we were at six-pointed stars saying the sacred name of God and then transforming into other people from the tarot. I mean, the vision of the Sufi is that God is in all life, in all form, in all process. And so, the dance draws people in, and that is the process. And the fact that it's going out and it's reaching beyond just the so-called spiritual community. That was his dream. World peace through religion. Religion needs to live down some of the world wars and other wars that it started, and really be a force for peace. And so drawing from the gold mine of religion, which is the example of the prophets and the leaders of the different faiths, and the practices that have worked over the centuries for, think when you do an Om Mani Padme Hum dance, how many millions of beings have gone on the raft of that mantra into liberation. I mean, you have all this working for you that's being brought into the whole current of the modern world through the dance, through the sacred dance, and through its movement, and by getting people off their position. Because when you're sitting or wherever you are, you're in your position. But when you're in the dance, you're in a process, you're in movement, you're in flow, and the dance moves through you. And I think that force combines with the evolutionary forces in our time, which are moving towards something great.
Would you speak for a moment about the actual location where we are right now? Just, and perhaps even if you wouldn't mind moving over there.
Yeah.
You'll have to take a trip.
Oh. Sorry, okay. Well,
how's the sun now? For you?
Well, the sun is totally, it's not in my face at all.
Good.
It's gone down. Oh, darn. Now I want some water.
Oh, that's okay.
So you want me to start?
Yes, please.
This is the gravesite of Murshid Samuel Lewis at Lama Foundation. It's been gradually built up over the years into where the stone has all been brought in, and a dance ground was built down there by different camps over the years. The plaque behind me it takes a phrase from the Prophet Muhammad that Murshid used often to quote and to say referred to himself and his work. And that is, on that day the sun shall rise in the west, and all men seeing shall believe. He knew that this great proof of the spirituality of the East was going to come to the West, and that Western people would grasp it in a hearty way that would help it along. I mean, he felt a part of this whole transmission that was done by Hazrat Inayat Khan and by Vivekananda and all these beings. He doesn't, when he says refers to himself, I mean that that people would see it, that the dances, that what would be given would all of a sudden be visible to everyone, that it wouldn't just be for those who have eyes to see, that it would become such a visible moment or in the historical process of harmony and joy and cultural understanding that people couldn't deny the kinds of roots, the divine roots from which it came. I think that's what he meant by referring to that. And over the years, people have come up here, and there's a pilgrim's hut over there that was built by Murshid's disciples, and people from Lama and hermits and others have come and sat and received all sorts of guidance. And that's why we like to have camps here too, because it's an awfully good place to come and sit and meditate and do practices. Thank you for the people that could see him, because his whole life he was veiled. He was veiled by not being able to get it right socially, or being too loud or too raucous or too quick. Or whatever it was that made it very difficult for him to be accepted. And so then, not to become depressed as a result of that, but to keep building up some inner love was great on his part. But on the part of others who could finally come to see him and love him and allow him to give out what he had stored within, that's what he really wants to say thank you for, because without that, there is no transmission of Murshid Samuel Lewis or dances or all this other stuff, because it took people who could see the light within him and accept him to make it happen, just like it does for each person. We all have that secret stored in each of us. Each of us is God coming to some kind of potentiality. We also need that sense of recognition and welcome that Samuel Lewis got.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.